Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome back to another DIY with your favorite YouTube host, MistrMopar. Haha. Anyhow, today's video, I'm going to show you how to change the transmission filter in a Nissan Xterra with an automatic transmission. This is a 2008. I believe it would be the same for the interchangeable years, which are 05 through 15, but I'm not positive on that. I do know the earlier model Xterras had the filter inside the valve body and did not have a replaceable filter. However, this one does. Again, I believe it would be this same for 05 through 15, but do not quote me on that. So the first thing you're going to need is your filter replacement. This is the CarQuest Premium brand. That's your part number for it. Now the Xterra calls for Nissan J-Matic fluid. In its place, I use the Valvoline Full Synthetic Max Life, and I'm also going to give it a quart of lube guard here. Now when we first bought this Xterra, it had 100,000 miles on it exactly, and it shifted really nicely, but I noticed from second gear to third gear, as you were accelerating, it just seemed to take longer than it should to go from second to third. It just kind of dragged out. So because of that, I replaced the filter and put new fluid in it, and it came out of it and shifted perfectly like a brand new transmission. We're now at 163,000 miles, so it's kind of doing the same thing. Goes from first to second fine, second to third, it just kind of drags out and takes a while. So I am going to do the filter again. The only thing that you need to drop the transmission pan in these is a 10mm socket. You can get on most of them with an impact, but you will need a ratchet for a couple of them, and I will show you why. So I am on the passenger side here, right behind the front tire. Down underneath, you are going to see your transmission pan right here. And it is just a bunch of 10mm all the way around it. See those ones right there? Because of that cross member, you've got to get a ratchet on them. So what you're going to want to do, because these transmission pans do not have a drain plug, what I'm going to do, and what I did before, is I'm going to go around the pan and I'm going to take all the bolts out of the easiest side to drop down, and then I'm going to slowly loosen them up around the other side until the pan drops down just enough to start letting the transmission fluid pour out into my drain pan. Once that's poured out enough, I'll finish removing the pan, but that will save you from getting a bath in it. I cannot remember the exact size of the socket on the transmission filter itself, but when I get there we will address that. So I'm going to go ahead and start dropping the pan, and we will come back. So I've only got the bolts out of the front side of it towards the front of the vehicle and about halfway around both sides, and as you can see, it's already starting to flow out. And looking at that fluid, you can see that it's not as pink as it should be. It is definitely dirty and definitely going to be an improvement getting it changed. Now this is not a transmission flush. This is just a pan drop, a filter replacement, and a refill. Now once that stops dripping, I'm gonna remove a few more bolts around the back side of the pan here until I've got probably just one or two on the end of it towards the back of the vehicle, and then that will really come down and pour out, and that just saves you from taking a bath in it. It's just a recommendation. So I've got my pan off here, and it does have magnets in it. I'm going to recommend you go around and clean those off, because they will have any material and shavings will be stuck to the magnets. And you can see by the look of that fluid, that's from the magnet, but the fluid itself is supposed to be bright pink and clean. This is a little bit dirty. I'll show you under the vehicle here. This black thing is your filter. It is a removable filter. 10mm bolts around the outside. Once that's done dripping, basically, when it's a drip and not just a steady stream, I'll take those 10s out and drop that down. And you can see that my old gasket is still attached to the vehicle side of this, so I'm going to have to clean that off. You do want a very nice, clean, smooth surface. Go around and just, if there's any remaining gasket or RTV or anything like that, just clean it off. Make sure you get a good smooth surface. Same with your pan. Wipe it all out, clean your magnets off, Make sure your surface here is good and smooth. Now what I do to prevent the gasket from moving, because all the holes have to line up perfectly, is I use a very thin layer. I mean just a thin bead, just enough to hold it, of ultra black RTV sealant, and I put just a thin bead around the pan, put my gasket on, make sure it's lined up the way it should be, and that just helps it from moving around when you're trying to put the bolts back in, and that just helps you get a good seal on it. So this is what you're going for with a clean pan. I actually took it inside and used a microfiber cloth and some Dawn dishwash and rinsed it out, washed it out, cleaned all the magnets off, and in doing so realized that I'm a little bit of an idiot, because there actually is a drain plug there, and I don't know how I forgot that. But I will say that given the location of it and the way that it's actually got a rib where the fluid would have to go up over that to get out, that it's not going to really drain a lot of it, so you're probably better off just to drop it down like I did anyway. But this is what you're going for before you're ready to put it back together. Nice and clean, magnets are all clean. So here is the old filter. It's funny, they don't look dirty, and who knows, maybe it wasn't, but the fluid was definitely dirty. So it's gonna get a new filter, some clean fluid. We'll put it back together and see if it helps as much as it did the first time. Now another thing I want to point out is when you're taking all the 10 millimeters around the edge of this, there are a couple of them that are bolts that are shorter than the rest, and then there are a couple that are nuts. There's actually a stud coming down from the transmission and the nut goes on it. So make sure you're noting that, make a mental note, take a picture, whatever you got to do, so you know which ones go where when they go back in, because there are different lengths. So I'll help you guys out a little bit here. When you're putting your bolts and everything back in the transmission filter, so what I found to be easiest, and that's probably the reason for it, so sorry about my camera work, the nuts, I am laying under the vehicle looking towards the front of the car. The nuts go there, there, and there, and those three nuts, I put those on first to hold the filter in place, and then you've got three really short bolts, and those will go right there, right here, and right here. Now on the longer ones, there are also two different lengths, but it's pretty self-explanatory when you're putting them in the holes. If you put it up in the hole and it bottoms out without catching the threads, then you need one of the longer ones. That was pretty self-explanatory. But as far as your short little, probably 3/4 inch bolts, you got 1, 2, and then 3 right there in the front. So I've got my new filter on, and I went around and cleaned underneath on the rim where the transmission pan will meet the vehicle, and all I use is just a scouring pad and just go around and just clean it off. You want it to be a nice smooth surface when you're done. And now I'm going to work on putting my new gasket on my pan. So it only goes one way. You'll see that there's a corner, a rounded corner, corner and a rounded corner. And as I had mentioned before, I use the Permatex Ultra Black. I'm just going to run a real thin bead around the edge of the pan, just enough to hold this in place, so while I'm starting the bolts in, it's not moving around. I know that the gasket will sit there where it's supposed to. So that's what I've done for the Ultra Black RTV. Like I said, when I said a thin bead, I mean just a very thin bead, and that's just going to allow the gasket to stay in place when I'm trying to put the bolts back in, so the gasket's not shifting and moving and everything's lined up the way it's supposed to be. See what I mean? I've got my gasket on. I probably could have used a little bit more of a bead in a couple spots, but it just holds it in place, so that way it's not shifting and trying to move when you're putting the pan back on. I'm actually going to put a little more there because it's not staying. So I'm laying under the vehicle, and I'm not sure how well this is going to come out because I can't really zoom out and keep my flash on. But if you run into a spot where, say, you're putting your bolts back in and the gasket is off just a little bit, what I do is I just take a little pick like this, and you can get up in there and just move the gasket to where you need it. And that is after you've got some of the bolts in that will just kind of hold the rest of it in place. But you can take just a little pick up in the hole and move the gasket whichever way you need to get the bolts started in there. So just as I finished getting the pan on, the skies started to open up and it started to pour. So I'm going to go through this quick. I've got everything back together. I've got to refill it now. You will look on the passenger side of the engine and you'll see that the fill tube is actually where the dipstick is. This is what it looks like. That's a 10 millimeter. I personally took mine out a long time ago and left it out because you don't need a bolt holding the dipstick in. It's just a pain in the nuts when I take it off. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pour my lube guard in there. And once this is in there, I'm going to dump my transmission fluid in. And you will notice on the dipstick that it tells you that it has to be running in neutral to check to get the proper fill level. At least I believe that it does. It's got a hot and a cold level. It doesn't say, but I'll be checking it for the cold level. Once you've got it filled up, put your dipstick in. You'll see hot and cold. Make sure it's full. Start it, run it, go through the, back up, drive forward just to make sure that it, gets the fluid running through the system, and double check it again and you should be good to go. So hopefully this helps somebody, but you can change the transmission filter in a Nissan Xterra with a 4.0 and an automatic transmission. Again, this is a 2008. I assume that it will be the same for 2005 through 15, but I'm not positive on that. Mr. Mopar, checking out. Thanks for watching.